Okay, so in Chainsaw Man episode 5, we were introduced to the concept of the Gun Devil, and today we're about to solve one of the biggest mysteries surrounding it. During this video, I'll be piecing together clues from the manga to show you how Pochita's arrival in Japan and the Gun Devil's disappearance are both directly connected. On top of that, I'll also take you through the origin of why Makima began working for the Japanese government in the first place, and as long as you stick around till the end, then I can guarantee you'll see how all the evidence fits together. Before we get into it though, for the first half of this video, I wanted to explain some details about the Gun Devil's backstory that the anime left out, which will help us to fully understand the theory in the second half. Alright, so as the name suggests, the Gun Devil is the physical manifestation of humanity's fear of guns, and its origin goes back to the year 1984. During that year, civilians around the world were buying tons of firearms as a way of protecting themselves against devils, but this behaviour had a knock-on effect on society. As Makima said, more people having guns led to an increase in gun-related crime and an increase in civil unrest in some parts of the world. With all of that craziness going on, it meant that the media was consistently talking about gun violence, creating a chain reaction where people then started to become more fearful towards firearms themselves. Given that the strength of any devil depends on how many people are afraid of it, the Gun Devil's power was quietly growing throughout the early 1980s, until eventually it showed up in 1984. On the 18th of November of that year, following a gun-related terrorist attack in America, the Gun Devil went on a rampage across the entire planet, killing 1.2 million people. Although episode 5 didn't show its physical appearance, in the manga it has a giant handgun sticking straight through its skull, and inside its ribcage are hundreds if not thousands of screaming heads. When we take a closer look, you can see that each face does have their own individual features. For instance, some have mustaches and stubble, whereas others are clean shaven. And it got me thinking that these are probably actual people. My initial thought is that these are just innocent humans who were offered to the Gun Devil by the American government, which is a conspiracy that I'll be discussing in more detail when we get to the theory part of the video. Alternatively, maybe the Gun Devil just has the ability to harvest the souls of certain men that it kills, with the ones here being selected perhaps based on their age or whether or not they have a shiny bald head. As ridiculous as that sounds, something like that wouldn't be that surprising because the Gun Devil does have some weirdly specific powers. For example, during one of its massacres, it had the ability to target and kill every living thing except people who were born in the months of April, July and October. Another example is how he was able to kill adult men within a certain radius, whereas adult women inside that radius still had a chance of survival. When you have powers as specific as that based on things like gender and the month people were born, I feel like stealing souls based on certain criteria like age and other things, it's not that crazy of an idea. Anyway, like I was saying, in 1984, the Gun Devil went on a rampage and wiped out over 500,000 Americans in just under 2 minutes. Its insane level of speed meant that it could do this and then travel to other nations within a few seconds. In fact, it was so fast that pieces of its flesh tore off as it was speeding through the air. Thanks to Makima's words in the manga, we know that the gun then went on to murder 8,000 people in Canada, 6,000 people in Mexico, 58,000 people in Japan, and nearly 30,000 in India. Later on, over 155,000 were killed in the Soviet Union as well, but because the country was so massive, it took the Gun Devil nearly 4 whole minutes to finish the job. Out of all the nations that got attacked, this was by far the longest time the gun spent in any one place, with the shortest time being the 0.4 seconds it spent in Hawaii. The fact Hawaii is noted down as its own individual country heavily implies that it never became part of the US in this timeline, which I thought was a nice detail that sadly wasn't mentioned in the anime. Another small detail that was harder to work out is the order in which each of these countries got hit by the Gun Devil, because the manga only gives us 2 clues. The most significant clue comes in chapter 73, when it's insinuated that the Soviet Union was the final place to get blitzed, and the other clue comes in chapter 13, when we find out that Japan got hit at exactly 10 AM. No other country was given a precise time of day like this, so I guess we can assume that Japan might have been the first one, but regardless, the attack only lasted for 26 seconds. During those brief moments, entire cities were flattened and countless homes were destroyed, including the home of the Hayakawa family. When the Gun Devil arrived in Japan, Aki and his brother were having a snowball fight outside, but as Taiyo's hands got cold, Aki innocently sent him to get gloves. It was at that exact moment that their house and Aki's entire family was torn to shreds in front of his eyes, and while it's obviously not his fault, you have to imagine that he feels some kind of guilt or regret about the exact way things happened. That guilt and regret likely contributes to his demeanor and, his desire to get revenge against the gun, and the only way he can do that is by finding the pieces of flesh. These tiny bullets are super important to locating the Gun Devil's main body, which in the anime is currently in an unknown location and hasn't been seen since the day of the attack. Now, with that explained, it's time to move on to how the Gun Devil's appearance was directly tied to Chainsaw Man and Makima herself. In order to do this, we need to discuss info that won't be revealed in the anime for a long time, so if you're an anime only watcher and don't want to know anything, then this is the time to pause the video, hit that sub button, and come back when you're ready to hear a few spoilers. For everyone else, it's time to break down what really happened in the 1980s, and the place we need to begin is chapter 73. In that chapter, Makima revealed some mind-blowing intel to Denji and the gang, which is that the Gun Devil was actually captured by humans on the same day it first appeared. Minutes after entering the Soviet Union, the Soviet army found its unconscious body lying on the ground because it had already been defeated by an unknown person. The person who took it down was never specified. However, if we piece all the clues together so far, including the fact that Pochita had 2 bullet wounds during this flashback, then the timeline starts to become clear. What I think happened is that on November the 18th, Pochita was in hell when he was confronted by the Control Devil, War Devil, Gun Devil, and a few other devils that show up later in the series. The evidence for this is that in chapter 87, Makima stated that at some point in the past, Pochita had an epic battle against the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and the weapons devils, which obviously would have included the gun. During this epic fight in hell, we know that Chainsaw Man took a bite out of the War Devil, significantly reducing her strength, and he also ate a few of the weapons devils, which erased some of their names from existence. Following that, he and the Gun Devil must have severely wounded each other, which is when the fight began to go in a completely different direction. With Pochita being too injured to continue, he decided to escape through one of the doors in hell, explaining why Makima said that he vanished during the height of the battle. By the way, the manga made it clear that many of these doors are connected to locations on Earth, proven in chapter 84 when he uses one of them to travel to Tokyo. Back in 1984 though, an injured Pochita went through a door that took him to another part of Japan where he meets Denji for the first time. Suffering from serious gunshot wounds from the Gun Devil, his body then morphed into a tiny orange dog, which is something Makima described as his near-death form. As we saw in the anime, Denji then offered human blood to help Pochita regenerate himself, and the two of them form a binding contract where they agree to help each other going forward. At the exact same time down in hell, after Chainsaw Man vanished, it was confirmed that the other devils did try to find him. My assumption is that they each must have split up and gone through different doors, with the Bomb Devil arriving in the Soviet Union, the Arrow Devil arriving in China, the Control Devil arriving in Tokyo for the first time, and the Gun Devil arriving somewhere in Japan at 10 AM. The wounded Gun Devil then blitzed through the country looking for Pochita, and within a few minutes he goes through America, Canada, India, and all the other nations we mentioned earlier, before finally collapsing in the Soviet Union from his injuries. This is why the mystery person who defeated the Gun Devil was nowhere to be seen, because Pochita had already done the damage back when they were in hell. Anyhow, after the gun fell unconscious, the Soviets took what was left of its body for themselves, while over in Japan, Makima began her long search to find Chainsaw Man. In order to do this properly, she needed certain resources, which is why she made a contract with the Japanese Prime Minister. In exchange for offering her services to the public safety devil hunters, the Prime Minister gave her a deal in which any attacks made on her would be transferred to random Japanese civilians. This essentially made her invincible, and thanks to the resources in public safety, she was able to track down all of Chainsaw Man's allies over the years. For example, she tracked down the Angel Devil to a remote village, and sometime after that she captured Beam, Power, Princey, and several other allies who used to be followers of Chainsaw Man. However, despite all her searching, she was never able to find Pochita himself, and that's because he remained in his near-death form, making himself unrecognizable. It was only once she met Denji in 1997 that Makima finally found what she was looking for, and she then slowly began planting seeds that would enable her to take control of Chainsaw Man for herself. For the purpose of this video, it's not really necessary for me to spoil how she tries to do this, but just know that taking control of Pochita was likely her goal all the way back when she first confronted him in hell. Switching over to the Soviet Union, as we established, they were the ones who found what was left of the Gun Devil's main body. This means that in the 1980s, the Soviets would have possessed 63% of the Gun Devil, while the remaining 37% were scattered around the world as tiny bullets. Most of those bullets were then consumed by lower ranking devils to make themselves more powerful, but what's really interesting here is how America reacted to all of this. Somehow, between 1984 and 1997, the Soviet share of the Gun Devil's body decreased down to just 28%, while the US somehow gained 20% of the body for itself, and a few other countries also got some smaller percentages. Now, for all we know, some of those countries could have paid large amounts of money for it, but when it comes to America, there's a scene in episode 2 that makes me think they might have just straight up stolen it. In this scene, Makima's higher-ups talk about how the American matter has made the Soviet warhawks angry, and the definition of a warhawk is someone who favors war or the escalation of conflict. Naturally, those types of people would be triggered if a devil belonging to the Soviets was taken by US intelligence, and I actually think this is all meant to parallel the beginning of the Cold War. In our own reality, when the Americans developed nuclear weapons first, Soviet intelligence then used spies to steal military secrets from the US. This helped the Soviets to develop their own nuke and level the playing field between the two countries, and I think a similar thing is happening here. As Makima once said, nuclear weapons don't exist anymore in this timeline, and so the gun devil is the closest thing that these countries have to its destructive power. Back when the Soviets found its body in the 80s, they became the only country to have this insane potential, and so it shouldn't be surprising that other countries would want to get in on that. The way I see it, it's possible the Soviets might have been willing to sell 11% of the body to China, but there's absolutely no chance they would have sold a whole 20% to America. Giving away that much of the gun devil to the US is something the Soviet warhawks would have never allowed to happen, which is why I'm pretty sure the American matter relates to the US taking it through espionage. This brings me to the conspiracy that I briefly referenced earlier in the video, which is that the American government has sacrificed some of its own people to the gun. In chapter 75, we saw firsthand that countries are using devils for military purposes, when the president made a contract with the gun devil to kill Makima. He made this deal by offering the gun 1 year from the lifespan of all American citizens, and when we consider that many of those people already had less than 1 year to live, the president effectively handed over their souls. That's why I think many of these people here are American citizens who had their lives cut short, and also potentially other victims who were sacrificed during any previous contracts that were made between the gun devil and the Soviet Union. Anyhow, before we wrap this video up, there is one tiny detail about this theory that I know some of you are probably thinking about, and that is the issue of Denji's age. If we assume that my theory is correct and that Denji met Pochita in 1984, then that would mean he's around 3 or 4 years old in this flashback. Personally, when I first saw this flashback in the anime, I thought he looked around 10 years old, but for the theory to work, that can't be the case, because if Denji was 10 in 1984, then that would make him 23 in the present day. Clearly, he's not that old, although because of his crappy upbringing, no one is certain what his exact age is. According to Denji, he thinks he's probably around 16, but given that he wasn't sure about this, it's possible he could be 17, 18, or even 19. The fact is, no one knows for certain, not even Denji himself. If he was to be 19, then that would make him around 5 or 6 years old during this first encounter, which looks more realistic, to be honest. Like, that could work. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think the ages line up? Anyway people, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to drop a comment below letting me know what you think, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more theories like this. Until the next one, peace out.